It's been a couple days since I've done a video, and so I thought I would just make one, kind of say hi and update. I generally don't, I've been making videos for several years now, and I make one pretty much every day, even when I'm out and about or doing something. And if I go even on a vacation or a trip, I'll generally make videos while I'm out and about. But this weekend I decided to take a new approach that I've never actually... It's something that I've always noticed when I go out and do things. I always like to take pictures. I always take my camera. The same camera that I'm using right now is it's just a Panasonic Lumix mirrorless, digital camera. It's a nice camera. Takes great photos, great videos, and I love to have and capture those moments of my life, so I can look back on them. And now I kind of shake my head at myself for so many years of trying to take pictures of everything. Like a lot of people, I have probably 20,000, 30,000 photos on my various hard drives and PCs and cards that I've saved over the years. And when I go back through them, you'll find that take like 5, 6, 7 photos of something, trying to get the right one and never delete them. And anyway, we all get it. The point is that trying to capture a moment without a camera is so much more difficult to learn, because we've been trying to... For me, I have a nostalgia. I like to hang on to the past as far as moments and events that really moved me, because I feel like those experiences are what make us partially who we are. And but over the years, the best experiences I've had, I just had no documentation of. And you start to think, well, maybe you don't remember it the way it really was, and then you just come to the conclusion it doesn't matter. What matters is that you remember it, and you remember enjoying it. So, yeah, this weekend I went to the Dead show, Dead and Company. So I am wearing the shirt here. It's funny, I never buy concert t-shirts, and then at the last minute we were packing up to leave, and a guy was walking through the campground selling them. I'm like, well, alright, I'll get one. It's it's one of those, another memorabilia type thing. You look back and go, wow, you're at the concert, whoop-de-doo, I love going to shows, and I love going to festivals and events, because it brings out a very close bond and understanding between myself and other people. And when you're focused on a particular band, for example, I went to Soak a couple months ago, the regional Burning Man, and it's great because it's all about the people. It's not about a band or an idea or music. It's about people getting together, dancing, hanging out, and having fun. Last weekend I went to see the Fish show. It was a 2-night show in the Gorge. It was phenomenal. It was a great weekend, and I had a wonderful experience. But then last night, see, the Dead, the rest of the Grateful Dead, or a couple of them, were playing, and they have right now a phenomenal bass player. I can't remember what's his name here. O'Teal Burbridge. The guy is just amazing at bass, and just blew my mind. And they're playing, of course, with John Mayer as the singer, and I was a little bit reluctant to want to go see John Mayer, because he's very... I realized when I was there, he's got the bluesy voice, the bluesy style guitar, and while the Grateful Dead played a lot of bluesy style stuff, I don't like direct blues type music, and he tends to lean more towards that direction, and his voice isn't quite as soothing as Jerry Garcia's. Now, a lot of people say, well, without Garcia there's no Dead, and I say, that's total nonsense, because when you go to a show, that feeling is there. So last night they played, or Saturday night, see, they played on Friday at the Moda Center, and so we went to that one, and I was kind of tired. It was an indoor show. I wasn't really that into it as much as I would have liked to be. So the next night we drove all the way out to the Gorge, took my friend, and we had 4 people in the car, drove out there, got a campground at this place called Wild Horse Campground, and it's just kind of adjacent to it's up the street basically from the amphitheater. I know most of you have probably never been to the Gorge Amphitheater, but it's along the Columbia River in the desert in the Gorge. It's just this huge, beautiful landscape. You can just look out behind the stage, and just for miles. It's just a gorgeous place. No pun intended. I didn't even want to use that word, but you can't help it. It's just so beautiful. The best place in the world to see a concert. this is just, of course not in the world. I'm sure there's better places for people. But from where I live, being from the Northwest, I feel most comfortable there. And so we went on Saturday night, and we ended up driving up there. We got there pretty close to when we had to actually go to the show. We went without tickets. We've just been going, on a whim, just say, well, we'll get tickets, we'll figure it out, I'm trying not to plan anything out. So we got there, we went up to the field, and everybody wanted to take some LSD. So I said, well, okay, I'll go ahead and I'll take a few drops. And I guess I wasn't very careful with the vial as much as I should have been. And I don't really know what happened, but I remember what happened. I know exactly what happened. But after I took it, in about, within an hour, this was like right after the show started, I ended up laying down in the field, and it's like a sloped hill, grass hill. I danced for a little while, and then I was just like, whoa. Hit me a little too hard. Something I didn't expect, and something that hasn't happened to me since I was probably, 18 or 19, when I accidentally took a little too much one time. Laying there, being aware of who I was, being aware of the circumstances of how I got to where I was, I didn't panic at all, because I knew that in all the LSD experiences I've had, you always come back from them. And the worst thing you can do is to think, oh no, I took too much. So I kind of laughed at myself and laid there and listened to the music. So here's what happened. The second set started, and everything slowed down. The music was like, chunk, chunk. And I know it wasn't literally that slow, as if I was like, but it was a time delay. It was a time warp in my mind. And that second set lasted basically longer than the entire first concert, the previous night, in my mind, because of where I was at. But I laid there and I looked up at the stars in the sky and looked down at the gorge, and I could see the river curving as the sun set. And it was just the songs they were playing, and they played a song called Eyes of the World, which is one of my favorites. And the bass that he was playing on that, because I love bass, I play bass, it's always my favorite instrument. I could just feel it pulsing through me. And while I was laying there, I was listening to Bob Weir sing the song, and I visualized, oh my God, this was it, These guys have been playing for 50 years, and they've played in front of millions of people. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if 1 billion people had seen the Dead. I don't know the actual numbers of people that have seen the Grateful Dead, but over 50 years, they played so many shows, and I thought about it. Every show, there's at least one person laying there in that state of mind I was in, feeling the music surge through them, becoming part of it. See, there's a certain dosage a person can take and just have great visuals and enjoy it. Then it gets up to these other levels, the level all the way up to, they've rated it to like 8A and 8B, where you can close your eyes and basically see these entities looking at you and seeing yourself reflected in your mind. So on one hand, you're completely out of your mind. On the other hand, you're completely in your mind, and you're so deep into it. And a person may think that would detract from the music. I'll be honest, in the past I've drank at a couple concerts. I had a few too many beers. I don't drink, so when I do, I can overdo it really easy, especially if I haven't eaten. And I went to see Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and I don't remember a thing about it. I went to see several bands like that, Fleetwood Mac and a few others. Just don't remember much because I was drinking. And the concerts that I've taken psychedelics at have been very memorable. Now, I don't really like taking mushrooms at concerts because they are much more of a body load and much more demanding on my psyche. And they get me way deep within my mind and my soul, and I start thinking about things deeply. But I don't really want to move. Most of the time when I take L, because last weekend I took the same dosage, but this weekend something else happened. They may have been bigger drops. Perhaps I made a mistake by spilling some on the vial. I really don't know what happened. Or it may have just been the way I reacted because of where I'd eaten, what I've eaten, where I was at. Point being that you can get to a very intense level of psychedelia that puts you somewhere that you just it's impossible to explain. And that's really what I wanted to come here and talk about, the trip itself, but I ended up here, I'm just talking about, well, the trip up there and the journey, but I really wanted to talk about the psychedelic experience I'd had, because it's such a difficult thing to convey. And part of me wants to go express that and share it, and another part says, it's such a personal thing, you'll never be able to express it. I made a video last week talking about LSD with nitrous oxide, and I've kind of pushed the envelope a little bit with that, trying to see exactly what it does. And the last time I did so, on Saturday night, I was laying there after we got back to camp, and I could close my eyes and see not just visuals or fractals, because generally LSD will present itself in many different strange visions. You may look at a cloud and see the bigger picture within that cloud. You will see fractals within things. You may look at something and seem like you can see it in really close detail even though it's far away. There's all kinds of interesting brain correlations that we don't understand that may be delusional. So what we're trying to do is distinguish what may be just your mind creating things, which many people would say that your mind creates everything that happens on LSD. But there's another aspect to it that's very difficult to express. When you see certain patterns that you don't know where they came from, and you think, is that from my subconscious, my psyche? Where am I thinking? Where does this come from? There was a point where I was laying there and I was looking at the edge of my tent where it was black strip, where it met the white, and I could dimly see the moonlight on the tent, and there was, instead of being a clean line, the line itself was a series of phi ratio, where it comes out at that particular sunflower ratio, the pattern that we see everywhere in nature. But they were all the way along that entire border, as if my mind was seeing where reality merged, but these were stacked on top of one another. And this is where it's difficult for people to explain. The most predominant visuals that I've had that have really stood out to me in these experiences have been one of that particular one. It's 1 to 1.618. It's the spiral that gradually comes out and gets larger at that particular ratio. I'm sure most of you know what it is, but within that ratio, it was 2 lines of dragon scales that wrapped around each other in like a nautilus shell shape, right? And each one of the scales kind of looked like the shape of one of those tickets you take when you go in to get a dispenser ticket, like you're next in line, where they're kind of curved at the top, and then they've got the little at the bottom where the next one fits into it, which also looks like a dragon scale. So here I am seeing this spiral dragon scales, which, of course, each one of the scales is a different color, but it's also morphing between all the colors. So they're all alternating between colors, and it's such a distinct vision that just keeps coming back. And I kept asking myself, I've seen a lot of interesting, weird things in clouds, or closing my eyes and seeing patterns. People have been trying to capture these psychedelic visions for so long, but it's impossible. Alex Gray, he's a wonderful artist. He's tried to capture the psychedelic experience in those pictures I'm sure all of you have seen, where it's a face of a man that's just his muscles and there's just colors everywhere. It's basically like DMT. DMT to me is something that sends you too far ahead of the game and doesn't allow you to pull yourself back to earth at a slow enough rate to gain anything from it. Basically, DMT can show you a glimpse of something beyond yourself and say, wow, there's another world out there, but something metaphorical, that it gives you like an idea that there's something greater, but it doesn't help you to process anything in your own mind or your heart. For me, anyway, I've found most people I've talked to, DMT is what, McKenna described as being shot through a cannon. It's impossible to take the time to understand what you're actually seeing. Whereas with a dose of LSD, you're high for 5 hours, and during that time, and a couple hours in, you're in your highest point of the peak, you can really focus your energy on one point or one idea in your mind. And most people don't, because we're too busy having fun with our friends or doing something. It's difficult to take a psychedelic and just sit down and let it go and process it without talking, without doing things. It takes dedication, you know. Now, I don't talk about psychedelics a lot, but they've been a huge part of my life when I was younger. And since then, I've actually become very reluctant to take them. Even when I have the opportunity, I just end up saying, no, maybe another time, maybe another time. I'm scared to take them when I do. I'm reluctant to do it because I know that I'm in for a ride that I may not want to take. But in the past, I've learned I needed to take them to see the things I needed to change. And each psychedelic really has its own system in play that helps you in different ways. LSD seems to be much less demanding on the body and the soul and the psyche than mushrooms. However, a mushroom trip can be just as intense, if not more. I've taken, I've gone to very strange places, but mushrooms really force you to internalize, whereas LSD, I can function more, and I don't know, it's difficult to explain. But then there's MDMA, and MDMA is great for people who maybe don't want the visions, maybe they don't want to go down that road and have an intense experience. A lot of people think that the LSD that's going around today, which a lot of it's not even real, but the stuff that is, they'll think, oh, I'll take a few hits, and they end up taking like 150 micrograms or something, and they think that that's what tripping hard is. They think it's based on the dose, but really you're just giving a stimulated effect. It's not based on the amount of tabs you take, it's how strong it is. You take between 500 and 800 micrograms, and it's a completely different story. It's mind-blowing and scary, but at the same time, it's a necessity. You look at the past, it's a necessity if you want to understand those realms. I mean, there's things that you can't just describe. You can't scientifically try to understand how people have visuals if you've never had them yourself, if you don't see, oh, that's what they're talking about. Because it's not just a vision. It's an all-encompassing symbol, which pervades all your senses. You can hear it, you can see it, feel it, taste it. There's a very, very interesting edge of consciousness, which with the nitrous oxide, it's almost as if it felt dirty. That was the only way I could describe it. At a point, it was almost as if you're touching levels you're not supposed to. It's as if you have a string in your mouth and everything's just kind of layered, and it sounds rattlesnake. It's very difficult to explain. It's impossible to explain, but, I like to try. Some of the things that I've seen in my life have been very fascinating in waking day-to-day life, but some of the things that I've seen in my trips have been even more intense and almost more real. It feels like some of these things are trying to express themselves, and they're important, as if my subconscious mind is really trying to tell me something that I need to learn. And when I was younger, I started off as just saying, hey, everybody had LSD, let's just take some and see what it's all about. Not realizing that taking 3, 4, or 5 hits of really strong stuff back then, that's something today that scares me, but it's something that I think is fascinating. And laying there under the stars on the field, listening to the dead, and thinking back how 50 years ago, people were doing the exact same thing with the same songs. Not all of them, of course. They started off and they're gradually built the Grateful Dead's music, but those who don't know the Dead culture or don't understand it, they of course, I don't expect people to get it. But the Deadheads aren't just a bunch of high hippies. It's a quote that somebody said that I read yesterday that says, they said, art is what we create to fill space, and music is what we create to fill time. So you have space-time between art and music, and that's how we decorate our lives. And if you look back at the ancient, like say Persian rugs and the cultures back then, I was researching paisley, because paisley seemed to be a predominant thing that I see in my visuals when I'm tripping. And I started looking back to the root of paisley, how, there's a lot, of course they used it in Scotland, but and they tried to, trademark and patent certain designs, but there were certain older ones from the Middle East that were like kind of a free-for-all, and they were maybe based on the almond shape or a teardrop or a leaf and all the things they symbolized. But if you look at some of the old Tibetan art and drawings and mandalas, they represent some of the visuals and fractals that you see under the influence of psychedelics, showing that that state isn't something that is just predominantly from the psychedelics, but rather a state of human consciousness that people can achieve through, say, transcendental meditation or certain practices of yoga or saying prayers or repeating mantras in order to stimulate the brain to put a person in that state. And there's a lot of debate to whether or not in Buddhism it's acceptable for them to use psychedelics, because a lot of folks are saying, whatever works. You just have to remember the psychedelics aren't going to enlighten you. All they're going to do is open a door. It's just like reading a textbook isn't going to teach you everything you need to know about that math or that particular subject. It's going to require a lot of other reading and reinforcement and understanding. So psychedelics are merely a tool, but a tool that is something that should not be overlooked, as I've personally had some revelations that really blew my mind. But Saturday night was something different. Something I haven't experienced in a long time, because I kind of stopped taking Lucy for a while. And it disappeared in like 2000 after the Picard bust, but in the 90s we took quite a bit. It just became more scarce, so we never saw it, and mushrooms were just everywhere for a while. But once it came back around, I was scared to take it again. And once I did, I asked myself, what the hell was I scared of? It's an amazing tool. If you ever get a chance and you're curious, go on to YouTube here and Google or YouTube search for 1950s LSD housewife experiment. There's several different ones, but housewife is the one that pops into my mind. And there are all these different people who go through the experience, and then the doctors ask them questions, and some of the responses they have are quite intriguing. So it's getting to be a long video, so I guess I'll talk to y'all later. Have a wonderful